Welcome to our series on the Book of Philippians. Don't worry, be happy. This is how today's speaker David Wilson describes Paul's message to the Christian believers at Philippi. David was born in Northern Ireland and holds degrees from both Trinity College Dublin and University College Galway. But it is not only his formal education which has made him a sought-after speaker. His work in Christian missions has brought him from his home in Europe to North America, Asia, and Africa. This personal involvement in people's lives has given him a practical insight into the challenges facing Christians from many cultures and walks of life. When David speaks about the letter to the Philippians, it is content to be sure, but content with a human heart. The first session is called A Personal Joy.
I was sitting at home minding my own business the other day when the newspaper came through the door. And on page 14, I read this extraordinary title, Christians Persecuted in Anatolia. Now, you may not know where Anatolia is, and I forgive you. But Anatolia is where the story of the book of Philippians begins. Philippi was not in Anatolia, but the man who wrote the book, he came from Anatolia, namely Paul the Apostle. And I thought, well, things don't change much over the years because that's the way he started out too, as a persecuted Christian in Anatolia. Before we look into the text of Philippians chapter 1, I want to say a few things by introduction of the history and geography of the place and who the people were. First, a little bit about the geography. This is a scale map of Europe. You will recognize here the Mediterranean coming up here into Italy, coming into the Aegean Sea here between Greece and Turkey, modern Greece and Turkey. Well, Philippi is exactly there. It's 55 kilometers south of Bulgaria. So it's just between Bulgaria and the Aegean Sea. It's not far from the sea. You can see the sea from Philippi. It looks down over the bay in the modern town called Kavala. Kavala is on the coast, and Philippi is up a little bit back. Well, in 360 BC, Philip of Macedon, and he who gave his name to the town of Philippi, Philip of Macedon, took this city from the Thasians. Philip of Macedon is better known as Alexander the Great's father. People seem to be excited about Alexander the Great and all the things he did. But it seems to me his father did a lot, because you keep hearing about, oh, this was Philip of Macedon, Alexander's father. Anyway, in the year 168 BC, Philippi then became a Roman colony. It was taken over by Rome. And in fact, it then became famous, and you will find Philippi often in history books, not just in the Bible, but in other history books, because in Philippi, Brutus and Cassius were finally defeated and killed by Mark Antony and Octavian. And in fact, they were defeated exactly 2,032 years ago today, as I speak. So this is the anniversary of a very important event in Philippi, the thing that put Philippi on the map. A little bit then about Paul. Paul was born not in Greece but in Turkey, so on the other side of the Aegean Sea. We know him as Paul of Tarsus, and that is near Adana in modern Turkey. And in fact, when Paul first met Timothy, that was at a famous occasion when Paul got stoned by the people at Lystra. They met each other in the most awful circumstances. And we read in Paul's letter to Timothy that Timothy actually saw this. He was a young person. He may have just been a teenager, but it appears that Timothy saw Paul being stoned at Lystra. So Christians have been persecuted in Anatolia for the last nearly 2,000 years. But it is to me a very interesting thing that is how Timothy met Paul. He saw him being stoned. A strange way to start. and a strange person to follow. You would think that Timothy would say, let's avoid this man. He gets into trouble everywhere he goes. But not so. Timothy then followed Paul, and Paul eventually says to him in his letter to Timothy, you even followed my persecutions. Now, Paul went to Philippi, first of all, we read in the book of Acts, under circumstances that were also rather stormy. He moved into town, began to preach the gospel, and the gospel had an effect, a radical effect on the business in town. And so Paul, shortly after he arrived in town, ended up in the Philippi jail. So it was not at all surprising when the Christians in Philippi got this letter from Paul from another jail. In fact, I would say that the day when the man stood up and said, we have a letter from Paul here, I think the people said, I bet you he's in jail again.